Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1273. So before we continue, I wanted to, just besides summarizing, just make a few points very clear, which may be confusing to some, but I think it's critical to underscore, to emphasize, and that is, I mentioned a number of times that this beginning of volume 3, a big part of it, especially when he's talking about all the kavanas, the intentions and all the growth as we grow from emotions through the cognitive, mudva, murgish, muskel, all the different levels of the growth of zah, like he put it, which really is essentially what creates the Gan Eden through our avodah, because Gan Eden is a garden, and the garden is where there are trees that grow. And what's the metaphor of that is the emotions that grow, zah. So the emotional growth of a human being and our avodah is serving God in higher levels of reverence, of love and reverence, ava and yira, and all that comes with that, as we spoke, all the different levels, all the way to ava, b'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshcha, all the way to b'chol moedecha, and that itself, 2 levels, and the highest level, where a person is in complete consumed, all-consuming love of God, which includes also the Ava Rabba B'Tainugim, the great love that comes with pleasure, the delights, as well as Mesiras Nefesh, as he said, and Simcha Shal Mitzvah. All of that is the growth of a human being in becoming a godlier person, that we feel and we relate to godliness. And that is how he built up the whole case, all the way to going back to understanding what Gan Eden is, that is created through our avodah, in addition to the Gan Eden that's there by creation. But at the same time, and so I pointed out that if you look at in Tanya, that this really is an explanation, a broader explanation of themes that are discussed in Tanya. And I mentioned the chapters even, talking about the chapter 16 and chapter 9, chapter 16, then later chapters 39, 40, and 43 and 44, and chapter 50, which he referred to, where it talks a lot about these kavanas as a person grows, that it's not just enough to do mitzvahs and to do action and to serve God, but to serve God with personal connection, with passion, with it being internalized and integrated. But on the other end of things, if you have all those kavanas and intentions and you don't have the maisa mitzvahs, you're lacking the bottom line. God sent us to this world to transform the world. So the truth is that you need both. That's why we call it a guf and a neshama. The guf of the mitzvahs is the actual actions that are critical, and the neshama of the mitzvahs is the kavanah, the intention, and the love and the awe and all the thought that goes into it. So therefore, both are necessary, and they both complement each other in creating what we're talking here, reaching the etzem, and the etzem should be begilui. And he says, shneim, you need both. Now, why am I emphasizing this? Because generally speaking, when you think about different schools of thought and philosophers, many argue that action, the most important thing in a human being is meditation and spiritual awareness and spiritual consciousness and higher consciousness. And action is not really emphasized. I think I mentioned a number of times, the Rebbe wrote to a letter to a conference on Jewish mysticism in London. In the letter, the Rebbe writes that one of the key things that distinguishes Jewish mysticism from other schools of mysticism is that you can reach through one act more that you can, higher than you can reach through a meditation. Because it's in Yiddishkeit and Torah that emphasizes Hamaiso Eika, the mitzvahs. If you go, for example, the Buddhist traditions or other spiritual traditions, the main focus is actually to go away from this materialism of this world and, so to speak, escape to the mountain where you can experience higher states of consciousness. That would be what's called spiritually evolved human being. In Yiddishkeit and Torah, they go hand in hand. You want higher consciousness, you also have to go into this world. Not basically strip ourselves from the material, but engage with the world and elevate it. It's not enough just to go into Ruchnius. On the other hand, if you only have the Gashmias, between the Maisa Mitzvahs, and you don't have the Ruchnius, so the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe said clearly in Tanya, chapter 39, chapter 40, talks about the wings that the Zohar says that Ava V'yira are the wings that carry the mitzvahs to heaven. If you don't have the wings, the mitzvahs will be grounded on this earth. So yes, you'll fulfill what God wants, but they won't be elevated, and therefore you won't have the spiritual experience of it. So it won't have that full-bodied experience. It'll just be mechanical. And fulfilling God's will, like I said yesterday, like a servant. But you won't be like a child, you won't be like a son, you won't be like a spouse. There won't be a partnership here. At the same time, if you only have, like he says there, the wings, a bird can live without wings. And even according to halacha, the bird is kosher, even if the wings are missing. But on the other hand, you can't fly without wings. So the Ava V'yira and the Kavanah Pnimis creates, you can fly, you can soar. And the Maisa Mitzvahs is the very body of what you need to be doing. So it's critical to understand this. And in Tanya, it's very critical. He makes this a very fundamental point, these two sides of the coin. The Maisa and the Kavanah and the Neshama. Especially in Kuntres Achron. If you look in Kuntres Achron, that the Rebbe Rashab is quoting the fourth one in Kuntres Achron, but even the first, the second, third essays there all talk about this idea, about that, why Maisa Mitzvahs, or why learning Torah, and it's not enough machshava. He brings there from the Zohar that thought alone is not enough. He actually says thought is meaningless, he says. On the other hand, Alter Rebbe says that without thought, that action without thought doesn't elevate. It doesn't go into deeper spiritual states. You're not going to be more spiritually elevated and more a higher state of spiritual consciousness. So you need both. And in many ways, that's what we're going back and forth here to understand the necessity of both. Gan Eden actually captures the spiritual consciousness side of things, the Giluyim. And Maisa Mitzvahs that we do in this world is more of the Etzem. And we still haven't finished the topic because Gan Eden is the schar, as he says, that's the result of our work in this world as we make the garden grow and the trees expand. Yizbu Atse Havaya, that the trees of Havaya, of Gan Eden, become expanded. And so you have both elements here. The actions, like he said clearly, he stated in the beginning of the whole subject, which we reviewed back in 12:12, I believe. He said that actions, that the kavanah without actions doesn't get you anywhere. Actions with kavanah, that gets you into Gan Eden. So action is a must. It's the kavanah, however, that brings the giluyim. And the more you have that, the more you're prepared. Like I said, a person can do a mitzvah, but if they're not knowledgeable, they won't be able to enter the classroom where they're learning high advanced learning Torah, because they don't understand it. So it's not just enough to do action. You need to also have it internalized so you're ready and prepared to accept the giluyim. So I just wanted to make that statement clear. I've said it a number of times, but it could sometimes get lost amidst all the details here. So regarding the Lahavan Inyan Mashakasav of Priyat Chaim, which I did look into right now, is a very complicated piece in Tanya there. And it seems to me that the Rebbe Rashab, besides using it as a fundamental piece here to understand the whole idea that he wants to discuss about mitzvahs and Ava V'yira, Torah mitzvahs and Ava V'yira, he's also actually explaining what it says there, because there are many, it's very short, it's a very long essay there, but a lot of the ideas are very compact and very dense. And the Rebbe Rashab is clearly explaining it. You see how many times he quoted it. So let me now go over what we've learned about in this Kuntres Achron. And the context is that he started by Inyan, who on page 1272, to explain to Inyan, who is coming to explain why don't we have mitzvah? Why does it say schar mitzvah b'haya al maleka? Why does it say that we don't have reward for mitzvahs here when we do have them in Gan Eden? And it says in the pasuk, the pasuk is filled, replete with all kinds of references of reward, and why specifically 5 things are spelled out that you eat, that you benefit from the fruits in this world. That's the operative questions. To explain it, he said, because the mitzvahs, even though they are mamshech the etzem which equalizes, and it goes from it so-called, it transcends the hierarchy of existence, but still, even etzem, there's more begili and less begili. He began by first explaining the piercing of the metzach. So though it's a bikia, so you're getting an atzmi from the forehead, like the glow. So, but it's not in a revealed way, even though you see something, but it's still somewhat concealed because it's coming from an atzmizdika place. So on one hand, it's an atzmi, but there's also levels within it. To explain it, he started with the kuntusachim that we're in the middle of learning, which we finished yesterday to the end of the paragraph on page 1273. Briefly, the Priyetz Chaim, the kuntusachim is explaining the mile of Torah over Ava V'Yira, Torah mitzvahs over Ava V'Yira. And he puts it in the context of Ava V'Yira like the cognitive emotions of love and awe, love and reverence of the angels. So they do experience a ziva shchina. They revel and they enjoy the reflection of godliness, as I explained, the art of godliness, but not the etzem of chochmei law. Not the etzem, the core personality of God's essential wisdom. Halacha, you do experience it. And he said 2 points. One is that it's the HaNeshomo, that even though the halachos is also a slapshus, but it's the HaNeshomo, it's the slapshus in the HaNeshomo of Malchus of Briyah Yetzirah. And HaNeshomo is like Chabad, is Elikus Mamish. So it's not concealed in this garment. It's still, the halacha has a sense of Chochmei law. And the second point that he made, whereas by the Midas, which is the Malachim, they only have the Chochmei law as it's concealed within existence. Like I said, for example, the wisdom concealed in nature or in science. That was one thing. The second difference is, okay, so they don't have the actual Chochmei law. The second, there's also a difference of how Chochmei law manifests in one the other. Not just that it's concealed, but the very level of Chochmei law and halacha, you have the muhus, whereas by the angels, they only have the mitzias, the chitzenius of chitzenius, as he explained. Like the mitzvahs cannot be compared to other objects in this world. God created mineral, vegetable, animal, and many different species. But you can't compare, for example, any species to a mitzvah. A mitzvah is what God chose. He chose an esrog, he didn't choose an apple. So even though apple is a God's creation, and it has God's wisdom in it, it has the beauty and all the design of God's plan, it's all there, but it's not a mitzvah. And a mitzvah is maisa, but he calls a mitzvah, the words he uses, maisa lekim heim. A mitzvah says maisa lekim. They're essentially an action of God. You could say, 1 second, everything is created by God. But there, it's a creation of God's. Like he says, a nivra. And this is the rotzen of God. The will, the purpose of existence is the esrog in that context, or the other mitzvahs. So the one is a means and one is an end. You could put it that way. And he used the exact language from Kuntusach, and he said, esrog iminiv hilbish b'hamakosh baruch hu mimuchuson v'atzmuson d'chsodim pnimim dezah. So in an esrog, even though every creation has in it a spiritual root and source, because that's what gives it energy, but in the mitzvahs, they have a particular focused divine energy that God says, this is what I want as a mitzvah. You fulfill my desire, my will, and my wisdom is in this particular mitzvah. And there you have that established. And later he uses the other words, Mashenk and Esrik, and to reconcile that with the words that he said before, Pnimium, he says, is the chitzenius of Pnimius HaKelim. So that's one of the places the Rebbe Rashab is explaining the Kuntusachim. So Nimtza. So therefore, when you're grasping, when you're holding on to the Esrog, and you're shaking it, as according to Kilchose, the way the Torah tells us to do so, so he says these words: Teifus mamish chayusei hamalubish by Enclothed Atzilus hamiyuchedes beiden sefer Maitzel Baruch Hu. He's mamish holding on to the very divine energy, which is united with the Maitzel, with the We're the artist, we're the creator, we're the emanator of Nukva Atzilus. Now you could say, when I hold an apple, I'm also holding a piece of godliness. Yes, but it's a creation of God. It's a nivra, a creation. Here you're talking about holding on to the very desire of God, what he wants, which is this particular level of Malchus of Atzilus that is so-called emanating and energizing this very esrog. So it would be like the difference, what it brings in Tanya. Everything you do in life is supposed to be sanctified. Even when you're walking down the street, even when you're eating a meal, even when you're doing what we call divrei reshus. Divrei reshus, which means things that are neutral. You're walking, you're talking. So things that are, then there's a thing called a mitzvah. So there are really three categories to just fill the whole picture. There's a mitzvah. This is a command that God says you should do, you must do this. There's the other extreme, an isur. You're not allowed to do something. Mitzvah sesa, mitzvah slices. Then really the majority of our lives is really neutral. It's called klipas nega. It's reshus, divrei reshus. What means reshus? Reshus means you can use it either way. You're allowed to eat a meal. There's not, as long as it's a kosher meal. But the question is how you're going to eat it, that's going to be up to you. So everything has to be sanctified and permeated with divine intention. But you can't compare when you do chulin al taras HaKodesh or kadesh atzmach v'mutalach, when you sanctify even the things that are permissible, something that's permissible, you can't compare to a mitzvah. A mitzvah means that God wants you to hold this esrog and the daled minim on sukkos. It's a divine commandment. That means this particular thing is what he wants you to do. When you're doing it, you're holding on to the very essence of God's will and God's wisdom, inner wisdom. Like we said, the pnimius hakavana of the building of the house, of the art. Whereas when you're eating an apple, l'shem shamayim, so you're also sanctifying it. You're revealing the divine spark in it. Not on bread alone does a person live, but on the spark of the divine inside the bread. But that is, you're aligning it to what God wants. And that's a big thing. That's transforming the world. But a mitzvah has a particular divine energy that you're revealing divine will in this world. So you could say, isn't it the divine will that we should sanctify all material things? Yes, that is the divine will, but it's not quite with the same power and intensity like an actual mitzvah. So it'd be like people who are working for the king, and they go and they make sure that the whole empire of the king is all aligned to the king's will. But then there are things that edicts and decrees and commands that the king gives that has a particular kingly divine energy that the rest of the elevation of the world does not quite have, and that's what a mitzvah is. That's what he's saying in this Kuntur Sachem. And that's why he emphasizes it. So begilui, in Giluyim, first of all, mitzvah touches the etzem because that's what God wants, but it also brings a far deeper gilui of Elokus because it's being mamshech from Atzilus, all these levels that he's talking. As far as the Esra goes, it's of Nukva Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus, and the other levels that he describes here. And then again, the parentheses he explains that even though he brings in the Kuntur Sachem from the Alter Rebbe, that all from the Eitz Chaim, that all fruits originate from the divine. So he says, Nida hate that the Kavanah mitzvahs esek mislabish amohus, Maisa Elokim Hema, that the very personality in the apple or other objects of this world, we have the art. The artist has created beautiful art, but you don't see the personality of the artist there. You only see the personality of the art. The artist is somewhat more concealed. When it comes to a mitzvah, you actually see the personality of the artist himself. So you're not just having a relationship with God's creation, you're having a relationship with God himself, the inner intention of why he created existence in the first place. And then he concludes the last section that we learned, that this is mitzvahs as they manifest in physical objects. The imkein kolshkein, and certainly the case is with Halochos, the Halochos about these mitzvahs, that there for sure manifest the personality of God's wisdom, because Halacha is actually the law, is actually the wisdom of God's plan. How does he want you to do a mitzvah? He wants you to do it exactly like this, not like that. So that's the Halochos. This is the Neshama, but Nefesh V'Ruach B'Yah, you don't have the Mahus of Chochma. And again, because Nefesh V'Ruach B'Yah is Nivra, it's not Mislabes Mahus Chochma, only the Chitzenius of the Chitzenius. But Halochos is Eir Neshama, L'kus Mamish, Mahus Chochma. And then he goes back to the first reason. And it's been already explained that in Chochma, it's in a revealed way. That's the two distinctions. One, it's more revealed. Secondly, it's a different higher level of the Chochma itself. Those are the 2 points he's making. So it's more revealed, and therefore it's on a higher level. And these are the halachas that are presented before us, laid out before us, aruches, which manifests Eir HaNeshomo of Malchus Briyah Yetzirah. Mahus Chochma. Yeah. So bottom line is, Nimtza the ideas halachas, the knowing, the learning, and the knowledge of these laws is the Gili Mahus B'chinas Eir HaNeshomo the Malchus the Briyah Yetzirah, which is Gili Mahus B'chinas Chochma Atzilus. It reveals the very personality of God's wisdom, the higher wisdom. And that's why through Torah, your tefus Eidei Sof Baruch Hu, which you can't grasp on your own. If you look at the world, for example, and go back to the apple or to any other objects of creation, so there it says less machshava tfisa beklal. No thought can grasp him. So you can't grasp the artist, you can grasp the art. We can understand the art. That's what's called understanding nature. To understand the artist, that no thought can grasp him, and his wisdom and his desire, the only way is by him giving a piece of himself, so to speak. God is manifesting himself, as he says in Tanya chapter 4. Torah is different than everything else. As I said yesterday, if we didn't have Torah, we could discover a lot about God, but it would all be as God works through his art. You wouldn't know about what he actually wants. What does he want from this existence? What's the purpose of life? What does he want from us? You would know, you can extrapolate and say from existence, I could figure out something about the artist. But it would really be more about what God created. And Torah, and less machshavat tfisa beklal. No thought can grasp him alone. You can grasp his creation, but not him, meaning the creator, the artist. Through Torah, he gives us what he wants. What's the purpose of life? What are the mitzvahs? What do I want you to do in this world? How are you going to use the art? And what's the purpose of the whole art? And that only the Eibishter can give that to us as a gift. And he manifests in Torah and mitzvah set. And through us, and therefore Torah and mitzvahs has this power. Where Ava V'Yira, as much as they are the wings, like I mentioned, that elevate and allow us to soar and experience higher consciousness, like the angels do, that's still Giluyim. That is not the Mahus of Chochma Elah. That infuses it with passion, with warmth, and with kavanah and intention, and allows us to experience it in a very internal way. But the actual connection to Chochma Elah, you need Torah. Without that, you only have the Giluyim, which don't touch, which don't reflect and don't reveal the Mahus Chochma Elah, the very personality of God, wisdom that manifests in Torah and mitzvahs. So that's a summary of what we learned, and where we concluded with the end of the paragraph on page 1273. I will stop because this is we still not finished the subject by no means, but if anybody has any questions on what I just said or what we learned, please.
Two questions. One, what makes Dir Patachtoning more?
Shalom Aleichem, Yecheskel. We haven't heard your voice in ages.
Baruch Hashem, I got up. What makes a difference in Dir Patachtoning more? The Maisa of Chol being involved in the world, or the mitzvah? What one accomplishes more in Dir Patachtoning? And the second question is, we don't get Chochma by holding the esrog. We get it by learning. It's nice. What happens by matzah? Is matzah we get the source of the matzah, the maira, or do we get Chochma Elah? Why does he pick? What's the maira of esrog? He picks esrog.
Okay. Well, as far as the first question goes, So the Rebbe in Tafshil Lamed Ches, I think the Sikh of Chayesara talks about that. On one hand, when you turn Rishus, like Choyel, like into Kedusha, like as in Kol Masechel L'Shem Shemayim, that even the things that are neutral, not a mitzvah, neutral things. No, your table is a neutral thing. You use it for learning Torah, so you elevate it toward godliness. And then there's the mitzvahs that God commands. So the Rebbe explains there and other places, is based on the Medrash that Rashi brings, why in Chayesara there's more elaboration about Yofa, about the Maisei of Maisei is the Eved Avram, the story of Eliezer going and being a shliach to find a shidduch for Rivka. The Torah elaborates 3 times. It tells the story. So it says Yofa sichosun shel avdei oves yesu meterosun shel bonim. That there's some more powerful of the sicha of a regular mundane language, because Eliezer wasn't doing a mitzvah per se; he was finding a shidduch for Yitzchak. That has more power in certain ways, Yofa, than the Teirosan shel Oves shel Abaneim, the Torah of the Oves themselves, or the children of the Oves, which is sometimes written very briefly in comparison. So the Rebbe explains, based on Chassidus, that sometimes the elevation of Sicha is Chulin like, which on one hand is only mundane language of Talmidei Chachamim, has a certain power, because you're reaching even things that are beyond, that are not in the realm of a mitzvah. You're elevating even the so-called secular neutral world. On the other hand, a mitzvah has more power in Dira B'Tachtenim because it's more Gili Alakus. It's like the difference between when you speak about the Bayis Beis Hamikdash, Bayis Rishon, and Bayis Sheni. When you talk Asusa de Latata is more you. Asusa de Le'elo is more Alakus. So there's mitzvah v'esa v'ena mitzvah v'esa. It says by Matan Torah, the Maila is now we're doing something that we're commanded to do. So on one hand, that's greater because now you have God's power of commandment. Ena mitzvah v'esa doesn't have the power of God's command. On the other hand, from the point of view of the human being, doing something you're not commanded to do has so-called more effort, more initiative on your part, shows more love, more susalatat, it's more you. So the truth is, in Dira B'Tachteni, we need both. You need to permeate the world more, and that's more the so-called Rishus. But if you're talking about the real Gilead Lakus in Gashmias, that's the mitzvahs. And nothing can replace a mitzvah because there's only 613 mitzvahs. This is what God wants. So it's also in Gashmias. Remember, both of them are dealing, we're not talking about mitzvahs and ruchnis. The mitzvahs also manifest in a physical way. In Kuntus Achron, he's talking about the mila of mitzvahs. He's not talking about the mila of Rishus. I'm just mentioning it as an answer to your question. As far as the second point, why he chooses Esrog, I would have to look at the commentaries. If he chose matzah, you'd ask why he chose matzah. Maybe there's a deeper reason. Maybe it reflects more the idea he wants to express. I don't have a direct answer for that, but there's always that way. You can't bring all examples. But practically speaking, matzah is the same as esrog, not the same amshacha, but the same idea that when you eat matzah, it's a sheishes yomim teichel matzah. Just like l'chachtem lechem b'yem harishin, the esrog creates hadar and all the minim. These are all mitzvahs, and every mitzvah has the same power. The Alter Rebbe chooses esrog. It could be because esrog is malchus, and it just fits very well into the context of comparing it to Ava v'yira. But however you describe it, I just want to say one more thing, that the Tzemach Tzedek does use this example, by the way, in explaining the difference between chitzenius that we're learning here and pnimius is what I just said. Sichas chulin sham Talmidei Chachamim, it says that the mundane language of Talmidei, you can learn from the regular language of Talmidei Chachamim, but that's not their inner intention. If you want the pnimius hachachmei law of a Talmid Chacham, you have to learn with them and understand the deeper thing. The Sichas Chulin, so he compares it to when God created the world. We call it Lav Urcha de Malka Lishtasheya b'Mila de Hadyeta. Mila de Hadyeta means the king It's not his natural place to be involved in mundane matters. When God created the world, it's called Mila de Hadyeta, because the Eibishter manifested himself through tzimtzumim, to create a world. Shabbos, he goes back, so to speak, to his natural place, which is a more elevated spiritual state. So he wants the world, but the world itself is created by words that are involved in creation of existence. If you want to know the Primis HaKavana, the Chochma law, what he's calling Muchus, the personality of Chochma law, you have to go to understand God as he is on Shabbos, or as he is in Torah and the mitzvahs and in the Shamas. That's where you get that sense. The final point that you asked about learning halachas versus doing a mitzvah, the way the Alter Rebbe says it is, what you grasp the esrig, his words are, when you grasp the esrig, hilbish behem these words. Let's just the actual words I want to use from Tanya. Kishetefes esrig minanei, kilchose as a tefes mamish chayuse amelubish behem menukve datzilus. So yes, he uses the words, you're actually grasping the energy that comes from the nukva datzilus, that's miyuchad with the Ein Sof HaMaitzil, which means the divine, infinite divine of the emanator. When it comes to halacha, yes, your mind is understanding God's wisdom within this halacha. He makes that distinction clearly. So in a Chanami, he doesn't say by esrig, the halacha, hilchas esrig would be muhus chachmei law. The mitzvah of esrig is the muhus of the Maitzil as he manifests in Nukva Datzilus, as he's united with Nukva Datzilus, which we're grasping when we hold the esrig. That's the language he used here. So I would stick to that language. Let me just see something. 1 second. Yeah. So I think both Maisa mitzvahs is Maisa Lakim as opposed to the actions that are not mitzvahs. And also the halachas is the muhus chachmei law as opposed to the chilib sichlim of the malachim, which comes from nefesh ruach of malchus of Briyah Yetzirah. So that's how I would say it. If you learn Tanya Perek Hey, which I'm going to be teaching next week starting, there he makes the distinction between Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is, when we say tefis, tfisa, like in seichel is, there's nothing like the yichud of seichel with elikus, because the mind completely encompasses. While mitzvahs is more of a lavush. You don't internalize mitzvahs like you do Torah. Torah is internalized in your mind. So your mind becomes one with God's mind. With mitzvahs, you become one with God's will. But there's also Chochma, the halachas of mitzvahs. So you have to understand that there's the difference in Torah and mitzvahs he talks about there. But either way, you're grasping, like he says, you embrace the king through his garments, through mitzvahs as well. So that's why he's saying Torah and mitzvahs. I mean, in the beginning of this paragraph on page 1272, he said, Mailas ha-Torah al avavira. But now at the end, he says that kashatvisa baraiso mitzvah. So clearly he's talking about both Torah and mitzvahs. Both of them have this advanced strength. Just a question of the difference on Torah is tefes alikus and how mitzvahs are. Mitzvahs is more makif and Torah is more pnimi, like he says in chapter 5 in Tanya. Okay. Any other questions?
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So you know what? I'll read a few lines in the next paragraph. I see where we started late, so I'll go a little longer. Now, he's continuing the discussion. Remember, keep in mind, we're going to keep going back and forth from the Maila of Maisa HaMitzvahs, which is really brings the Etzem, and without it, you don't have anything, like he said, and the Kavanah and the Pnimius that is so vital in the experience as well, that it should be permeated, that your whole being is permeated with godliness, the Pnimius. So, I just want to see one thing before I continue. Yeah, the paragraph on page 1271, the last paragraph, is worthwhile reading several times, because there he makes it very clear, both sides, that to be mamshech atzmus, you need mitzvahs, and the same, which is greater, that's matan Torah, greater than the ruchnius of the mitzvahs of our avos, of our patriarchs. At the same time, in order to be begiller, you need to have the avarabba and all the kavana and so on. It says, "B'maisa mitzvus levad gam keshi kabel b'chinas kabel sel shemachas amitis ha'eru behelam ve'enem mer begilui." Right, which is really where Gan Eden gets its energy, is from the pnimi, from the kavana, with the mice. Okay. Now he goes the other end of the coin. I'm reading the bottom of page, a new paragraph on page 1273. These pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And nevertheless, this transmission of Chochma that we just said, God's wisdom in halacha, the Chochma satira, the Chochma in halacha, in the halachas that are before us, lifnei, like you said, aruchis lifnei, that are presented, that we have in our halachas, who dafka idei slapshus be'er HaNeshomo de Briyah Yetzirah. It's specifically through manifesting and through enclothing itself in the garments, in the garment, in the slapshus, in the energy of Neshama of Briyah Yetzirah. Because here's the question. I'm presenting this question. If you're telling me that Chochma we have the very essence and mahus of Chochma through halacha, so why do we need the neshama of Briyah Yetzirah altogether? Why can't we just hold on to Chochma? God gives us Chochma. I mean, it's my question. It's not his question here. I'm just wanting to emphasize the point. And I should add something I forgot to mention. He said, "B'derech maiver through asiyah." In other words, islapshus is in the neshama of Briyah Yetzirah, but it's maiver asiyah. Why? Because it's not the same like I said, like science or nature, like the apple. There, it's b'derech islapshus and asiyah too. Here, the halachas retain a certain element of the divine, like you said, neshama is alakus mamish. Ma'isa lekim mitzvahs are. And the halachas are maintaining Chochma of Atzilus as a manifest islapshus in the neshama of Briyah Yetzirah. Still, you have the wisdom of God as you're learning the mind, God's mind, as you're learning halacha. And asiyah is b'derech maiver, so it doesn't assume that final levush of asiyah. That's why it retains still more Chochma. But now the question is the other way around. Why do you need neshama? Why not have just pure Chochma? So the Rebbe Rashab says, you can't have Chochma alone without it manifesting in some form of Briyah Yetzirah neshama. Yes, it's a divine element. It's not concealing. It's still transparent. But you need this slapshus. Why? Or you could read that. That's what they say below. You could also say that the halachas before us that we are learning, when we learn halacha, you could say medabrim midvarim gashmim. They're about matters that are physical matters. Or you could say medabrim midvarim gashmim. They talk about physical things. Every halacha is talking about something physical. Reuven says this, Shimon says this, and the halacha is that you listen to one of them, or both of them, or whatever the thing is. Shnai merz and betalis. Every halacha is dealing with some physical issue. It could be litigation matters. It could be damages. It could be ben adam lamakim. But it's all dealing with matters of this world. Halachas that are telling us how to live our lives. Whatever it is, Hilchas Shabbos or Hilchas Kashrus or Hilchas or Hilchas Niskei Mammon, whatever it may be. So they're dealing with physical matters. The Chochma lo datzilus I efsher shetedaber b'inyanim agashmim. And Chochma lo Atzilus in its pristine, pure form cannot speak about physical matters. Ki'im b'inyanim elokus levad. In Atzilus there is no physicality. It could only talk about things in Elokus, pure Elokus. So in other words, since halachas have the other side that is coming into some form of relationship with physical matters, if it didn't have the Eira Neshama Briyah Yetzirah, it would still remain pure Elokus, things that are purely interacting on the cosmic level of the spheres interacting, Chochma interacting with Bina. How would we know from that how to deal with some issue that's being challenged down below? A person comes, demands $1,000 from someone, says, you owe me $1,000. He says, no, I owe you $500. So you say, since Meideh b'miktsas, he acknowledges part of it, so he's supposed to take a shvur, an oath. These are matters in Atzilus, that would not be the language. In Atzilus, it would be some type of spiritual discussion between maybe Zah and Malchus, how they're interacting with each other. So for it to have that type of physical expression, you need to have the levush, the slapshus in Eira Neshama Briyah Yetzirah. Where in Atzilus alone, it would be purely Elokus. The Rebbe Rashab adds, just like it's seichel haruchni shebenefesh, it's not possible that the intelligent, the sublime, the ethereal seichel within the nefesh on its own, yaskel bedvarim gashmim eloya idei slapshus b'chemer hamoyach. It would not be possible for ethereal intelligence in the mind of the soul to understand and conceive of physical matters if it didn't manifest in the chemer hamoyach, in the very physical matter of the brain. In other words, the neshama l'mayla in Gan Eden, for example, also has seichel, Chabad. But there, it cannot relate to physical things. There, it's learning things on a spiritual level. For the mind of the neshama, which is ethereal on its own, to relate to physical matters, the mind has to manifest in a physical brain. Chemer hamoyach. And he gives another example, just like it's not possible, that the ethereal power of sight, of vision, to see and grasp a physical thing without a physical eye. In other words, to say that because you have hariyah, the power of sight in your soul, that you can see physical matter. No, that doesn't work. It needs to manifest in a physical eye. And the lens of the eye and all its components allow you to see a physical object. So, for example, you say Riyah Sichlis, a person sees with their mind. Chacham Einav Bereshe, a wise person's eyes are in his mind. In other words, you see something, you have clarity, but that's not physical clarity. That's clarity that you see, you understand, you see things, you envision, etc. But to be a physical thing, the spiritual, the ethereal or spiritual energy of the vision, the power of the sight has to manifest in the eye, physical eye. But Ayin Beis is barely ill, and delve or examine what he discussed earlier. Dibra Maskal Shlach Lecha Aleph. Oh wow, that's going back all the way to the beginning of Ayin Beis, page 30. He says here, B'inya Royenes HaNishma. So there he talked about what by Matan Torah they're able to see the sights. To see the sounds and hear the sights. So he explains that's because there was an element like synesthesia by Matan Torah, where you're able to go into the etzem keiches hanefesh, so sight and sound crossed wires. But usually it doesn't work that way. Your sight sees things, your ear hears things. So he talks there about how it goes from ruchnius to gashmius. Bottom line, he's saying here that you need, going back to the concept of interface, that you need the slapshus in some form, something of Briyah, neshama of Briyah, to give the halachas some type of physical body, essentially. Without that, it would be pure alakus in Atzilus. And it's only the level, the energy of the neshama, not nefesh ruach. Nefesh ruach already conceals. It's neshama, but it's the neshama of Briyah Yetzirah. It's no longer Atzilus. Which this neshama of Briyah Yetzirah is coming from the outer containers of Atzilus. Next page, 1274. As as those outer containers of Atzilus come and enter into the world of Briyah Yetzirah, so now they're no longer in their pure, pristine, and undiluted form in Atzilus, as was explained earlier. Even though, like we said at the bottom of page 1272, that they're alakus mamish, the neshama, it's a lakus, nevertheless, commensurate to the way it is in Briyah and Yetzirah. It's a lakus that's able to speak in the matters of the creations. It's now moved from pure concept of a lakus into a language that relates to the matters of this world. It's still revealing God's wisdom in this world, meaning revealing God's wisdom in these halachos, but it's able to speak about, like when we say Dibra Torah b'loshen b'nei Adam, the Torah speaks in a way that we can understand. If the Torah was going to speak in the Atzilus, you wouldn't have the words Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz in ways that we can understand. What's heaven, what's earth. Those words would be there, but it would mean everything would be on spiritual levels. It would be Chochma and Bina and Patzufim and Oris and Kalim. Well, now that we have it, we can have something that's like Mipsar Echzalakah, from my flesh I behold God. How's that possible? Only when there's something that manifests in HaNeshomo Briyah Yetzirah. L'daber b'inyanei Nevrayim. So it's like God speaking the language of man, if you wish. Whereas Atzilus, God is speaking the language of God, a divine language that's somewhat removed. It's not removed from the structure. It still has Chochma Bina, but it doesn't have yet physical terms that we can hold on to, like handles that we can relate to. And therefore, through the enclothing, Islapshus, not Maiver. It's like garments that a teacher uses, like an example that a teacher uses to dress up his ideas of Mahus Chochmei law, the Islapshus of the personality of supernal wisdom, the B'chinas Eir HaNeshomo, in the Eir HaNeshomo Briyah Yetzirah, the Liyeshe Shezeu Alakus Mamish, even though, I'm sorry, not even though, being that this is Mamish Alakus, even though at the same time it's also the outer containers fundamentally, like he said, from Atzilus. And I'll explain that in a moment. How do you reconcile its outer the dimension of the containers while it's still a kus mamish? Because of that, so this level can now receive Chochmei law that manifests in this Eir HaNeshomo, this energy of the Neshama, in the comprehension and understanding of the personality of Chochmei law. Okay. Now, what he means that it's both Chitzenius HaKelim and it's both the same Eir HaNeshomo is basically, remember, a Keli at the end of the day is a container for energy. Now, the container has both sides to it. We've learned the Pnimius HaKeli is how the Keli receives the Eir. Like think of it, the inside of a cup. Inside of a cup. The inside of the cup is containing properly the wine inside the cup. The lip, the outer lip of the container, or the outside of it is our hand can hold it and we can sip from it or drink from it or pour it to someone else. Now, when the Keli knows its role is completely bittul to the Eir. It's not an independent entity. The Keli is just, if you didn't have a cup, you couldn't drink wine. Even if you drink from a bottle, so the bottle is the cup. If the Eir itself doesn't have a Keli, there's no way for it to be received by the Makabel. It's like energy without a place to express itself. Or it's like ideas without words. You need containers. But the container is not to be seen as an outside entity. It's not a foreign entity. It's still a divine container. In Atzilus, the container, even the Chetzenius HaKelim, are still Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad. They're still divine. The only difference is they're the divine force that creates makabel, a recipient. It's a divine force that receives and is mamshich and draws down. So think of the human body. The human body, to be alive, a human body is a soul inside the body. If you didn't have a physical body, a skeleton, and not just a skeleton, all the limbs and the organs, the neshama would not have a way to express itself in this world. Now, a healthy body is not a separate entity. It's not like an outside force. It's your body. The soul enters the body. They work together. So when everything is going well, the chitzenius hakelim are simply necessary because they're going to draw the oil into the next level of Briyah and Yetzirah. So they still retain HaNeshomo is there in the chitzenius hakelim. As a matter of fact, the chitzenius hakelim become the HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah. So it's not a contradiction. So you have both qualities. It retains the divine mahus of Chochma Allah, while also traveling through the chitzenius hakelim into the neshama, HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah. So when we now get the halacha, we have both qualities. We have the mahus of Chochma Allah, but we have it in a language that we can speak about. Ruven, Shimon, like I said, the different physical matters and mundane issues that halachas address. That's what he means here, that it has both sides to it. And that's why you need this islapshus. Okay. I'm going to stop here by the Yadua, even though it continues the discussion, but here I will stop. But I want to take any questions if anybody wants to ask anything.
It's actually the Miver. It's actually the Miver that converts it to Gashmias. The Miver and the Sia seem to convert it to Gashmias. Is that
Where do you
correct?
see that? Who says that?
It's further in the paragraph, but we're going through several stages here.
Okay, but I haven't reached there, so I don't know that. Okay. I don't want to jump until we read it. Right now, this is what he said so far. That's the slapshus in HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah. And I said there's more to go, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, so but we experienced Briyah.
I can't answer a question of something we didn't learn yet. That's my point.
We're just doing it right now. This is exactly what we're talking about right now. The slapshus in Briyah Yetzirah. So we going to have an experience of slapshus in Briyah and an experience of slapshus in Yetzirah?
HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah. That's the expression in Tanya. HaNeshomo de Briyah Yetzirah. That's the words he uses.
Do we have a relationship to that ourselves down here?
When you learn halacha, you're learning Chochma Allah as it manifests in Dvarim Gashmim, in the physical matters. That's what he's saying here.
That's a bottom level.
I don't know what you mean by bottom. It's what halacha is. It's both Chochma Allah of Atzilus as it manifests in the garment of HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah, which gives it both sides. Not clear what you're asking.
I just wanted to know if we have any inkling what it means is Slapshus and Briyah, and any inkling what it means Slapshus in Yetzirah.
The Rebbe Rashab and the Alter Rebbe don't speak about the difference between the two. They say HaNeshomo of Briyah Yetzirah. That's the expression he keeps using. Okay. So there's no real discussion difference between Briyah Yetzirah here.
Here, I understand. Okay.
Well, the other way, if you could find. I don't recall anything, and I don't know if it's relevant, but if you find another Maimarim, by all means, please let me know.
Is it like Talmud and Mishnayos?
I'm not even speculating, honestly. I don't know. I have no clue.
Okay.
I have no clue. I mean, again, since he doesn't say it here, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's HaNeshomo Briyah Yetzirah. Maybe. If you find somewhere, it could be discussed somewhere. I'm not saying it's not discussed anywhere. I'm just saying I don't know.
All right. If you don't know, I'm going to defer. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No, I'm saying I don't know. I mean, as I said, it could be somewhere else. I would have to look it up. Right now, I'm trying to figure this out. This is complicated enough, Okay. Any other questions? So we'll stop here.